My question to start the show, does anybody out there know what faith is? Do we know what faith is? I'm not talking about religious faith. I'm just talking about faith in general. 47 days to college football. Do we have the faith? Do we believe that there's going to be football in 47 days? Well, that's week 0. Maybe I'm going to have to reset the clock. And if we do have football, I'm most likely going to have to reset the clock to whatever the adjusted date is for the start of the college football season. MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Let's bring in 18 on the line right now. Let's push that to triple digits very soon. I appreciate you stopping by, and I appreciate you joining us for another live stream here on a Sunday night at 10 o'clock, 10:07, 10:09, whatever it might be, Eastern time. Welcome in. I'll get to the chat room in just a second to survey your comments. Of course, I'm taking calls at 860-325-3687. It would be so nice to talk about football. That's why I started this channel. That's why we're here, is to talk college football. If there's a channel out there that is more dedicated to just talking nothing but college football all the time, I don't talk about my personal life. I don't go on about last weekend's trip. I don't do anything. I just talk about college football. That's why we're here, is to talk college football. And I want to talk some college football. So we have 3 objectives pretty much when we look at the possibility or the cancellation of a 2020 college football season. Number 1, we want people to be healthy. So that's first and foremost. It's not just the players, but everybody involved. We want people to be healthy. That's the number 1 consideration. But let's also consider that, yeah, we want to watch football. And that really should be the 3rd consideration of the 3, is just our pleasure and entertainment in watching football. There's also money to be considered, and I'm not talking about big money going to the fat cats. Yes, they will get theirs, of course. But I'm just talking about people who depend on the sports industry, and in particular college football, whether those are local merchants, vendors, people that work within the college football and college athletics industry, whether that be academically, within the institutions and the campuses, or in whatever fashion. Let's understand that this pandemic has severely impacted probably people that I'm talking to right now. Has it impacted me? Not directly. Thank God, thank goodness. Yes. I have been spared to date. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? Who knows? We're all going to be impacted financially to some degree, whether that be directly or on the periphery. So 3 considerations here. Number 1, safety. We want people healthy. Also, the people that have been affected and will be more affected by the pandemic financially, economically, and that is, again, all of us, but more importantly, some people are impacted directly. And then number 3, again, why do we play college football? For entertainment. It's really an entertainment thing. That's not why it started back in 1869, but that's why it exists right now. Some professional athletes would be well served and their egos brought in check, and a little bit of a reality check given to the professional athletes, in particular, the collegiate athletes as well, because most of them have been, many of them, I shouldn't say most, many of them pampered their entire lives. But let's just address the professional athletes, because they're being paid, that their skill only exists because of the entertainment god that's in this country. That's the only reason they are rich. So for the ones that complain, I'll be kind. They have no idea. Actually, most of us in America have no idea. So I will include myself. But to that degree, they have no idea because their skills and abilities would be best served in other countries tracking down their meal for the day. Their strength, their size, their speed would be best served, yes, finding dinner for the next meal, not for bouncing a ball or throwing a ball or hitting a ball. So let's put the skills and the abilities of these athletes, and certainly I've enjoyed a lifetime of watching sports and love it. It's funny, though, when people ask me certain questions that are reasonable questions. Who do you look up to? Who's your favorite athlete? I shrug my shoulders. I haven't had a favorite athlete since I was probably 20. So that portion of it in regards to looking at these people in that light is so far in my past that for me, it's strictly entertainment. And you know that I love yapping about it and talking to you all about it. This is what I love about sports. One of my first videos ever. I don't even know if it's on this particular channel because my first rendition of this was called On the Mark. On the Mark was my first shot at this on YouTube. I called it On the Mark. And one of my very first videos was why I love sports. Competition, just watching freak athletes do amazing things on the field. I love the organization of it. I love the structure. I love the history. I love the tradition. The competition, of course, I started with that, but I'm going to go back to the competition, the simple competition on the field. Who's better? Man versus man, team versus team. Who's better? The strategy, I love the strategy. And again, I love the structure, the organization, debating divisions and conferences and how should the playoffs be formatted. The history. If anything, I would rather sit on YouTube and watch an NFL playoff game from 1977 than to watch the game that is going to be played in week 1. I love the tradition and the history of sports in general. And I used to be more of a broad sports fan growing up. I would watch golf and tennis, certainly baseball. I loved, made a comment, I believe this was yesterday, as I was having dinner and just kind of kicking around here and flipped on the TV. And I was looking for various re-airs of games. That's what I've been doing, is watching re-airs on ESPNU and the Big Ten Network. But I ran across a Cubs-Cardinals game from 1984. NBC Game of the Week. If anybody can relate, the NBC Game of the Week used to just be just heaven. Joe Garagiola, Vin Scully, Bob Costas, I believe, did that particular game with Tony Kubek. Oh. And I sat there and watched the Cubs and the Cardinals from 1984. Okay, we've got our first call. We will talk college football because we do it like nobody else. Best discussion, debate, and analysis. MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
What's up, Mark? It's JT.
Hey, JT. What's going on?
Nothing, man. I just want to ask you a quick question. So, with the Pac-12 having conference-only games, is there a chance that they finally get a team into the college football playoff? Because, as me and you both know, the Pac-12 has probably been one of the weakest group of Power 5 conferences in college football. And now, with the fact that Oregon doesn't have to play North Dakota State, which is a game that a lot of people felt could have an upset factor, especially when you look at, you know, how great North Dakota State has been, and they don't have to play that game. Then they don't have to play Ohio State. So the Pac-12 really, is there a chance that Oregon can win out the Pac-12 conference schedule that they're about to play and somehow get into the college football playoffs? Or, like, does it benefit another conference having a shorter schedule other than, you know, Clemson? So I just want to know your thoughts because, like, all these teams is playing conference games. We don't really get those out-of-conference matchups. So, like, how is that really going to affect the college football playoff rankings in general? Could we have an expanded playoff because of this? Or
So, JT, understand that when you bring up the Pac-12's bid to make the college football playoff, let's see, since the first time since 2016, and you're bringing up the major obstacle being a game against North Dakota State, with all due respect to them. They run the best program currently in FCS football. They have a high-level NFL prospect playing quarterback that if the Pac-12 would allow, the best team in the Pac-12 would allow that to stand in their way to make the college football playoff, then the Pac-12 does not belong in the college football playoff. And the Pac-12, if its best is going to lose to North Dakota State, then they would have lost other games. So I get your point that that's a difficult out, but if your best team in a Power 5 conference is losing to an FCS school. So think about this. When is the last time that a Power 5 conference champion or any contending team in a Power 5 conference has lost to an FCS team? I've got to go back to Michigan in 2007, losing to Appalachian State. And of course, we later found out very quickly that App State was a legitimate FBS football playing program. That shouldn't be a consideration. I understand your point, but that shouldn't be a consideration. Okay, next, your question's loaded. I love your question. It's worth a lot of talking points here because who knows? Because if everybody's just playing conference games, then we have nothing on the table, no games in which we can actually compare results of the teams between the conferences. Think about it. Nothing. We have absolutely no data points to compare these teams. None. And the eyeball test has come into play amongst the football people in the room that belong to the College Football Playoff Selection Committee in recent years. They talk eyeball tests that they can tell if Team A is better than Team B, regardless of the results of the record. Well, they're going to have to be relied on even more because none of these teams are going to be playing each other if what the Big Ten set in motion in the Pac-12 is going to cover all 5 conferences, which most likely it will.
Mm-hmm. So if the SEC does reduce, because the SEC hasn't came out and said anything yet, but like, would the SEC be in a good position since, you know, basically most of the time you got schools like Alabama who play basically nobody's, like they're scheduling for like the week 1 tune-up games and things like that. So like, would it benefit the SEC a little bit more since the SEC is probably like top to bottom, if not one of the best conference in college football? Because I believe Georgia and Alabama were scheduled to play like early on in the SEC conference schedule. So like with the whole schedule getting reduced now, that will most likely take place in one of the first few weeks of college football. So like would the SEC or which Power 5 conference in your opinion would be at the best advantage with this conference scheduling if every conference goes like this, and which conference would be at the disadvantage?
Well, the SEC is always in good position, JT. That's all there is to it. The SEC is given the benefit of the doubt. We have had 6 college football playoff seasons. The SEC is the only conference that has not missed the college football playoff. Well, the ACC has not missed the college football playoff, but the SEC is the only conference that has not missed the college football playoff, plus has had 2 entries into a college football playoff in 2017. So yes, the SEC is always in great position, and the SEC would have to completely cannibalize itself with the other conferences having undefeated champions to be left out of a playoff.
So do you think Clemson will be at a disadvantage because they don't have no out-of-conference schedule, and they don't really have that? They don't really have any great teams in the ACC this year unless they're hoping that maybe Miami or a team in the other ACC division kind of like surfaces and somehow becomes competitive, which Miami, from a talent standpoint, probably will be their best chance. Maybe you got a UNC that merger. So, like, if you're Clemson, does this kind of put them at a disadvantage? Because unlike the other schools, like the Pac-12 probably will have a few ranked teams. The SEC is going to have a couple. The Big Ten is most definitely going to have a couple. The Big 12 probably you'll have like 2 or 3. But the ACC, who really can Clemson lean on, unless Notre Dame, and then I'll add that after this one. But like, it comes down to disadvantage, and then after that, with the short scheduling, where Notre Dame finally joined the conference because they really have no choice to.
The ACC has been the worst conference for the last couple years, but Clemson has been one of the best teams and obviously has not lost games at the ACC and has been a clear choice for the college football playoff. So in a sense, you got to understand, JT, you're basically not asking me questions against an objective system. You're asking me to predict what people are going to think. It all comes down to that college football playoff selection committee and those 13 people and what they think, especially now that we don't have conferences. Again, most likely, if everything falls into place, as has been started by the Big Ten and the Pac-12, we don't have any data points. So if there's perception that bleeds into 2020 from the past, it's going to be, well, starting with week 1, the SEC is the best conference, and really there's not going to be anything to tell anyone or indicate that it's not the best conference because it's been the best conference and they're not playing games against other conferences. And the same thing on the flip side for the ACC is that it's been the worst conference. Therefore, there's not going to be anything to be proven. There's not the opportunity for the ACC to prove that it's improved. So it's whether people hold on to those perceptions or they just watch football and try to evaluate these teams. I'm always in favor of the season blowing up the playoff and making the playoff scenario confusing and to ruin and tear it to shreds and discredit it. That's happened, in my opinion, every season except for last year. Last year was clear-cut. Still a bad playoff situation, but it worked out for the playoff committee last year for the first time in 6 years. The other ones all had controversy attached, and this will have to have controversy attached unless it's expanded, because regardless of what the records are, you've got no data points, no games between conferences, and what I would love to see is all 5 conference champions go undefeated or have 1 loss. I want ties everywhere. That's what I want.
And then my last question is, so if all of the conference get rid of these out-of-conference games, does that mean Notre Dame finally has to join the ACC, or will they just not play college football anymore? Like, I want to know your thoughts on that. Like, what do you think most likely will happen with Notre Dame?
What should happen or what will happen? Those are 2 entirely different things.
What do you think will happen with Notre Dame? Like, because it's no non-conference game, so like they basically don't play in the conference. So like, do you think they should join the ACC at this point, or will they just not have a season?
Did you see the video I posted a couple days ago about this?
No, I didn't. I'll have to go check it out.
Yeah, go back about 5 videos. I posted a video about this situation and I ranted for about 8 or 10 minutes because I have a strong, strong opinion about this, and I'll state it right here. The ACC is showing us from the time that it signed this contract with Notre Dame, the ACC is telling us what it thinks of its own football product. It thinks it's garbage. It thinks it's inferior. Can you imagine the SEC or the Big Ten allowing a program, a school to do this to them, to say, we're going to join you in all these other sports that largely don't matter. And when I say I don't matter, I have great respect for the athletes. But of course, in terms of popularity, in terms of people watching on television, they really don't matter, other than men's basketball and women's basketball to a certain extent. but you don't have to join in football. But we want to make money off you, so we want to play you in a bunch of games because we know that nobody shows up to Duke games and nobody shows up to Wake Forest games and Boston College games. But when Notre Dame comes to town, we sell more tickets and more people watch the games. So we want to make money off you. And then we give you a big slice of the pie as well, because you already have your own TV contract with NBC, and now you can share in our TV contract. And it's a win-win situation. But you're not a member of our, we would love for you to be. I know that the ACC would love for Notre Dame to join the conference in football, but Notre Dame's saying, nope, we got a better deal. We want to stay independent and do our own thing. But the ACC doesn't have enough self-respect to hold Notre Dame to the fire as they should. Now comes this pandemic. And JT, this is the perfect opportunity, as I stated in this video the other day, perfect opportunity for the ACC to show some guts. I'll keep it clean in regards to language. Show some guts and say, hey, Notre Dame, do you want to play football in 2020? We can save you by saving your season and saving you multiple millions of dollars. I don't know what the price tag is. If Notre Dame does not play football this year, how much money they're going to lose. 20 million, 50 million, I don't know what that figure is, but it's all TV related. If there were people in the stands, it would be much more than that. But still, just based on the TV, it's going to be tens of millions of dollars. Well, if I'm John Swofford, the ACC commissioner, I go to Notre Dame and say, here's the deal. We will save your 2020 football season by allowing you to play a full conference schedule with us. In return, you are joining our football conference and will be a member of the football conference from here on out for 10 years, 20 years, whatever kind of contract you would want to sign. I'd sign them for at least 20 years. And that would be the deal. Now, is the ACC going to do that? Do they have enough self-respect and self-dignity to do that? No. They will just let Notre Dame continue to embarrass them and use them to just put together a football season for 2020 and then continue to go and play their own games against other teams throughout the country and be an independent. The ACC is going to bail them out this year. They shouldn't. This is a perfect, with all the negatives that have come from this pandemic, which are everything. There is no tangible benefit to this pandemic. It's been awful. This could be the one benefit to the ACC. The ACC has a golden opportunity. It's been gifted to them. It's laying right in their lap. John Swofford, if you had guts, if I was the commissioner of the ACC, I wouldn't even have to think 5 seconds about it. Notre Dame, you're joining our conference or you're not playing a 2020 football season. That's the end of it. If you turn me down, fine. We do have a contract with you. You're just not going to play this year, and we'll pick up the contract and finish it out in 2021. That's my answer, JT. But it's not going to happen. They're going to bail Notre Dame out and allow Notre Dame to play their ACC games this year. And probably give them even more ACC games from what I understand and allow them to play as a full-fledged member this year.
Yeah, man, I agree with you, man. I'm gonna let you go, let somebody else on the line, man. But that's crazy, man. Like, I really think the ACC could really use Notre Dame right now, man, because like I think out of all the teams in the ACC we have right now, it's probably only two that I really think will probably give Clemson a legitimate chance. And I'm not, as a Miami fan, I'm not going to say yes, of course not, even though on paper we should. But I think if Notre Dame, if they were to actually join the ACC, would be one. And I think UNC possibly could, even though UNC doesn't quite have the talent there. But I just think with the coaching and Sam Howell there, I think they could give Clemson a little bit of running their money there, which is why, like, I really hope that Notre Dame just goes ahead and says that, you know what, we're just going to go ahead and join the ACC, and, you know, we're going to stop complaining about how we always get screwed by the college football playoff committee and such years when we have good years. So I really hope that Notre Dame just goes ahead and they just join the ACC in football.
Appreciate it, JT. I want to take this call that's coming in right now. I appreciate you. Thanks so much for calling in. MarkRogersTV, the voice of jump at the gun. Hey, it's MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, it's me. Okay, don't be late, a.k.a. Nick Hickson.
Nate's always late and never great. Is that what I got out of that?
I mean, sure.
I'm just kidding, Nate. Of course. Nate the Great, don't be late. Nate Kingston, thank you so much for calling the show. As always, it's an honor, sir. How you doing tonight?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm good.
That's good. I know you like to talk about college football. I do too. I don't even talk about college football too. You know I love rivalries, don't you?
You love what, Nate? What was that?
I love rivalries.
Rivalries. You're a big fan of the rivalries. Sometimes you push some rivalries on me that I'm not completely on board with, but you love your rivalries, sure. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I actually want, old rivalries that used to be a rivalry, like, for example, for Miami and Nebraska, I want that back. Although they played in, when Mike Bowers was there, like, for that season, then what's it called then? That season that rivalry ended, I think, or is it still a rivalry?
We're talking about Nebraska and who?
In Miami.
Nebraska and Miami. Oh, yeah, I remember you bringing this up months ago, Nate, about you were just, and I actually cut this as a separate video, and I put this on my Miami channel to address your question about the Miami-Nebraska rivalry. So this is the deal, Nate. You have rivalries for different reasons. Rivalries come about for different reasons, but generally they come about for the reason of that there is geographical proximity. The two schools, the two teams play in a geographic region, and then they have to play for something. They play for something on a regular basis. A conference championship. They're running into each other and they're getting in each other's way. Okay, the Nebraska-Miami rivalry, if that's what you want to call it, formed because Nebraska was an all-time great program. Miami emerged in the early 80s, and as you well know, they played in the 1983 Orange Bowl. I know some people are going to correct me, the 84 Orange Bowl, because it was New Year's Day, for the national championship, and Miami won, and that was Miami's emergence on the national scene as a power, upsetting Nebraska for the national championship. And then over the course of the next 12 football seasons, basically, between then and 1994, they played in 4 or 5 Orange Bowls, all with national championship implications. And Miami won all those games until Nebraska finally came through and beat them in 1994 to win a national championship. And then they played 7 years later at the Rose Bowl for another national championship in which Miami dominated the game and won again. So they have played on the big stage with national championship implications a number of times throughout the history of the two programs during recent times. And so, yeah, there's history there. I don't consider it a rivalry, but so what's your point? Are you asking me if it's a rivalry or not? I say no. The two programs have history.
Yeah, I mean, they have history, but I wish it was still a rivalry. But, I mean, no, it's not right now. But I wish it was. Because, but, in that other rivalry I was talking about, in that Notre Dame live stream, I kind of came up with the rivalry that you didn't know of. I don't know if you know this, but Notre Dame and Nebraska had a
'90s rivalry in college football,
Notre Dame and who?
like in Nebraska.
Notre Dame and Nebraska.
Yeah.
No.
I mean,
Notre Dame and Nebraska have never played in any meaningful games. They played a series in the early 2000s, and they might have met in an Orange Bowl maybe in the early 70s. Nebraska and Notre Dame, there's no connection between those two. What's up next, Nate? We're not going to talk about Notre Dame and Nebraska because there's nothing to talk about.
All right.
You're trying to find a rival for Nebraska. Nebraska's rivals right now, are Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. And it used to be Oklahoma back before your time.
Yeah.
That was a great rivalry. Now, that is Nebraska's all-time great rival, Oklahoma.
Did you hear that they're gonna, I was gonna say they are gonna play in 2021 and 2022 season, Oklahoma and Nebraska.
Yes. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, but I didn't see on FBSschedule.com because they have the future schedule of all possible teams. I didn't see a lot of Oklahoma and Nebraska games for the future, but I saw two. That's what. But out of rivalries, I was looking for probably Michigan and Ohio State. Although I could say this to Ohio State fans, I know you're a Ohio State fan, Mark, but I just say I respect Ohio State when they're not playing Michigan, for a fact. If they are playing Michigan, I don't like them.
Dare I ask this question, Nate? How you can possibly respect a team one day and not respect them the next just because they're playing somebody else?
Well, is like if they're not playing that game like week one or something like that, I can root for. I know it doesn't make sense, but it's my opinion. We all have our opinions,
Of course.
But yeah, but
as illogical as some may be.
Yeah, but thing like for House of fans, that you said right now you're Michigan's. I want to say daddy, but owning the series right now, you will say, but
yeah.
You're House of fans. You're on this 8-win streak. The all-time series is Michigan's leading that.
Do you feel
series.
good about that, Nate? Would you rather?
I know.
No, I'm not discrediting it. All the games count the same. It's all one game, but they started playing, I believe, in 1896, 1902. I forget the exact year now. Right around 1900.
Yeah.
So, and those games count on the series record just as much as the game that was played last season. But I'm guessing, Nate, that you would rather have 15 wins in the last 16 years than you would wins back in 1904.
Yeah, I just focus on the all-time series, not just the current win streak or whatever it is.
Okay, Nate, we got some other calls coming in. I appreciate the time. You have a great night. All right, Nate? Don't know what happened to our call there. Hopefully somebody will call back in. We had at least 2 other calls.
I called in.
Oh, hey! There he is,
What's up,
Hurricane
man?
Logan. There was nothing to prompt me
What's up,
there.
brother?
How's it
Awkward
going,
intro.
man? There was nothing to. Hang on just a second. Yeah, you're not calling the right line. Hurricane,
My
please.
bad. I need to
Yeah.
save that number.
Yes, please do that next time. Anyway, go ahead.
So I have a weird question for you.
Yeah.
And this is, like I said, it's weird, but if you look back at the 2 programs and who they were, who would you rather be right now? Like right now in this specific scenario with the staff, the recruits, everything. Would you rather be Miami or Georgia?
Who would I rather be, Miami or Georgia?
Yeah, like be like as a fan.
I thought you were going to give me a difficult question.
Okay, well, I think I know where this is going to go.
I'd rather be a Georgia fan.
That's true. Okay. I can respect
now,
that.
are we having historical debates? Those are 2 different things to me. Yeah, if you're going to sit around and we're going to talk history, then I probably want to be a Miami fan. If we're going to argue about 1991 and 1983 and 2001, which is now becoming quite a long time ago. But if we want to have that historical argument, Georgia can still have historical arguments that best Miami. It's not one-sided, but the Miami fan has the obvious 5-1 or whatever the number is. I believe, yes, 5-1 national championship lead, which is substantial. But it depends if you're having an intelligent conversation, as we do here, or you're having just the we got 5 and you've got 1 conversation, because there's a lot more to it than that. Because to me, if you've watched me and you have, Hurricane Logan, I think the national championships are great, and that's the reason we all play the games, is to win a national championship, and it's the ultimate. But they're very inconsistent in the way they've been awarded, and there's a lot of controversy and argument over them. But if but if you're talking about who's got a better situation right now, it's not close.
That's fair. I mean, I'm like I said, I'm not like a Georgia hater or anything. You know, I'm a Miami fan, and I'm not a delusional one. But that was just like a honest curiosity question, because I think if me, like personally, if I was a Georgia fan, like I'd be very frustrated where I was at because of how it's went from firing Mark Richt to getting Kirby Smart and having all these high hopes again. And obviously Georgia's been a lot better than Miami record-wise, but when it comes to winning the big game that really, really counts and you can brag about, I don't think it's happened. And that's all I'm saying. You know, I'm not trashing any other team. I'm not like
in Hurricane, I'm not discrediting your stance, because some people just think it's all about national championships, and if you don't win the national championship, then you've got 129 losers in the country and you've got 1 winner. I don't really see it that way, because again, it's an invitational.
I agree with you highly. I do.
But it's, and I'm not discrediting any Miami national championships. If anything, I have looked back over time. And so I've done a series where I've looked at 1983, 84, 90, 91, and 2000. And if anything, 2 of those seasons, I said Miami did not win a national championship, but I believe that they were the best team in the country, and they had an argument to be in position to play for a national championship. They just weren't given that opportunity. So the Miami national championship total could be higher. So it's an interesting debate.
Yeah. It's just, that's just a good conversation to have. It's not anything negative at all.
It's an interesting one, but
that's one thing I brought up too on another show that I was on tonight is if anybody here recalls like how Georgia fans reacted, whether it be on YouTube or Twitter, when they lost to South Carolina, a lot of the problems they were talking about were with the head coach, the offensive coordinator, like those same problems that Miami has. And don't get me wrong, I think Georgia is in a little bit harder of a division than Miami is, but at the same time, I think they've had the same problems Miami does. And I think Georgia has more wins and goes to bigger games than Miami does, but at the same time, they don't win those big games. So it's kind of, to me personally, it kind of cancels it out. You know, I'd rather go to the big game and win it than not win it. And me being a Miami fan, you know, when you have 5 interceptions against Penn State, an Ohio State game that was called by a penalty, you know, I'd rather just not go to the game than experience the heartache that we've had. That's just my honest opinion.
Yeah, and this is not a right or wrong. You would rather, okay, the season you just played, 6-6 season and losing the Independence Bowl, was that what it was? Losing a minor bowl game to a group of 5 team. You would rather have that season than play in a conference championship game?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Okay.
And that scenario, no, I would not. Absolutely not.
Then I'm not following your point, because I thought that was your point, that you didn't want to play and lose frustrating big games.
Well, just like Jordan said in the chat, I would much rather have Georgia's problems than Miami's problems. And I do agree with that. But I think those problems are very similar. And when it comes down to, like, if you're a Miami fan, the first thing they say is, oh, well, we have 5 championships. Or you know, your last championship was in the 80s. You know, like, that's their first argument. So it's just kind of like, it's like a seesaw effect, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes sense that it's an interesting debate. It's an interesting debate. It's like, I don't know if you like other sports, but I can't really relate this to let's say, well, let's keep it within football. Would you rather be a lesser player, let's say a role player, and win championships, or be a superstar who never won championships?
I mean, if it's me and it's for the money, I'd obviously rather be a superstar because I know where it's going to take me.
Yeah, but I'm just talking about in terms of talk. People view you. Like, you watched, have you ever watched the NBA?
Of course, yes.
Okay,
yes.
Robert Horry. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Yes, sir.
This guy might have one of the oddest careers in the history of sports. He averaged like 6 points a game in his career. But he made so many huge shots in crucial NBA playoff and championship games, and he won like 6 championships, but he was a role player. But
of course,
he's got a legacy of, this guy's clutch. If this guy walks into a room or his name's brought up, you're clutch.
Well, that even goes into like
but
the
he's
old
not a great player
with Richard Lewis and Hito Turkoglu. Yeah, of course, I understand what you're saying there, 100%.
It's just an interesting, or do you want to be, if you like baseball, Don Mattingly or Ernie Banks, who never played in a playoff game or won a playoff game or a playoff series, but were great players, but didn't even come close. Ken Griffey Jr. to winning a ring.
Yes,
do you
sir.
want to be a consistent winner, Georgia, or do you want to be, I'll steal a phrase from our friend Cam Underwood, a microwave dynasty, where you've been basically insignificant from the time you founded football, whenever that was, probably the 1920s, until right around 1980. And then you were great from the early 80s to the mid 90s. So for about 12 or 13 years, you were great. The best program in college football, if you take that time period against anybody else. And then you fell off for a few years because of probation. Then you jumped back up. For about 3-4 years, you were great again. And then you've fallen off into mediocrity post-2005 for the last 15 years. So you have about 15 great years in your history.
So I did want to ask you one thing, going off topic, excuse me. What do you think it does for Miami if we don't have a season? Like, let's say we don't even play ACC games. We just have no season. What do you think it does for Miami, the recruiting, De'Aaron King? You know, what do you think happens with De'Aaron King? Because I heard somebody say that, well, this is his only season, and I don't think it's going to work that way exactly, you know?
I don't think so either. They're going to extend
it's
eligibility
be like a
for these.
Scenario, kind of.
I would think that they're going to extend eligibility.
Exactly. exactly.
I think that you shouldn't lose hope as a Miami fan. I know that it's been a rough ride for 15 years, and I know that I get on the program and have a little bit of fun with it just because it's a mystery. You've got all that talent in your backyard, and you don't recruit to the level that you should, but you still recruit well. And your rosters recently are not great. They're not elite, but you should win much more than you do.
Right.
And it's frustrating on another level. Georgia frustration has been just for the last 3 years. And at other times when Mark Richt was there, he could have won a national championship about 3 times as well, specifically in 2012, coming to the brink of it and not getting it done. That's another type of frustration.
One thing I will say, too, is Miami, as far as over the years and how mediocre we've been, Miami is definitely recruiting very well out of their backyard. And if we call that the state of Miami, like on the 30 for 30, the state of Miami, I think we've definitely drawn the line there and have done much, much better than we've done before and letting other schools take it. Especially with the new recruit that we have.
All right, Hurricane. I appreciate the call. It was a great question. Drum up some other good questions. I like those kind of dilemmas. I got some other calls coming in, but I appreciate it, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. What's going on there?
The call will start at the beep.
Hello, it's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, how you doing, Marcus? This is your old pal, Marcus Aurelius.
Marcus, how are you?
Yeah, it's you two, public enemy #1, calling in to set the record straight here.
Oh boy, here we go.
Man. Yeah, here we go. Hold on to your britches.
What I say wrong?
Listen, no, I'm not going to rag on you. I'm going to rag on your callers very briefly. Miami Hurricanes should stop calling themselves the Hurricanes. They have no right to associate themselves with the sheer force and strength of a hurricane. They should call themselves thunderstorms. Just like in an afternoon in summer in Florida, a thunderstorm only shows up for about an hour and a half tops. A hurricane is there all day. The Miami Hurricane football program shows up for about 45 minutes during a football game. Stop telling me that Georgia sucks. Stop telling me you're going to beat Clemson. Y'all can't get past Duke, Georgia Tech, Louisiana Tech. So please save us your pretentious arguments about how great your football program was back in 1846. It's just not worth listening to. Point Bravo. Notre Dame ought to be ashamed of themselves. We have to listen to them rattle their tin cup on the side of the highway asking for everybody's help. We already offered you your help, and you denied it because you thought you were greater than everybody. You don't deserve to have a football program. Just like Miami, y'all were great 300, 400 years ago. Y'all deserve to just shut down your program, sell your stadium, turn it into a nice big church so everybody can go there and enjoy their Saturdays, unlike watching Notre Dame football, which literally makes everybody in the nation nauseous and confused. Have a good night, Mark. Take her easy, and God bless you, buddy.
Appreciate that, Marcus. Thank you so much. Marcus had his rant right there. It was bam. Deliver the rant. I'm off. I'm done. Mic drop. Thank you, Marcus. Good to hear from you. Got a lot of good comments here in the live chat tonight. I think people are fired up. They're feeling desperate for football. I believe that's what's going on here. So it's crossed my mind. What are you going to do, Mark? What are you going to do this fall if there's no football? What are you going to talk about? Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark. It's DeAndre. How's it going?
Hey, DeAndre. Thank you so much for the super chat. I just saw it right there. I appreciate it. How you doing tonight?
Oh, hey, you know what? Everybody said what you going to do without football. Like you, NCAA football, do the season that way. I mean, I was taking away that I can't gamble this year, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
Yeah, but you know, one thing that I heard you say about we were talking about Notre Dame last time. I think I spoke to you. Well, nobody's mentioned BYU. they got to have the worst situation there is. And there's no if everybody said we just gonna play conference games,
Yes.
they got to have the worst situation.
They have the worst situation because aside from Notre Dame, they have the most on the line, the most riding. You know, places like New Mexico State and UMass, Liberty that are independent teams. I don't want to say that their results and their money situations inconsequential, but they don't make the kind of money that BYU does because of football. So you're right. I would say the same thing. Yes, Notre Dame is getting bailed out. BYU's the next in line in terms of power brokers among the independents, and they're going to be left out to dry, it would appear.
Hey, Mark, I got a quick question. I'll let you go after this. And I don't know if I'm going to phrase the question right. I was on my own channel, and I had a thought about Florida State and Clemson. Both got 3 national championships. And I heard you just tell the young man that, you know, Georgia and Miami's on the same level. You know, Miami has been good for 15 years. How do you judge somebody's greatness? I'm just asking. I know you're not the root of college football, but I'm just asking. Because I was telling somebody who's a Florida State fan, and you might disagree with me this, but Clemson probably have more successful NFL players than Florida State has. And you have Wharton, Brooks, and Dion. But Clemson has had Trevor Price, Michael Deacon Perry, Darnell Woodford, so on and so on. I don't know if you agree with that statement. What do you think about that?
So you kind of lost me there because we were comparing programs, and then all of a sudden you went to the NFL level. Are we talking about comparing programs based on NFL talent?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Miami fans will always say, you know, if you look at the national championships and their players' success at the next level, they did a good job of developing players. So what I'm asking is, if you look at Clemson's players and Florida State players on the next level of development, would you say Clemson has had more success with their players
that's an interesting
in NFL
question.
level compared to Florida State?
Yeah, you could certainly tack on, of course, Deshaun Watson and Dwight Clark. LaMarcus Joyner. Jalen Ramsey, of course, at Florida State's a top corner in the NFL. Boy, I would really have to. You've inspired me a little bit here. And the former caller, Hurricane Logan, bringing up Miami versus Georgia. I should probably ask. I'll take a poll and say, what programs do you want me to compare? And people will throw out compare Oklahoma and USC or whatever. And I'll just go through history and I'll compare them. That could be something right there. I don't know if people would enjoy that or not. NFL players. Yeah, Sammy Watkins.
You got DeAndre Hopkins.
DeAndre Hopkins.
I would even give you some Breland, who played at Clemson.
Sure.
He had a big game with Kansas City. Maxwell, who played with Seattle, played with Philadelphia. He played with Clemson. Oh man, I can't remember some of it. Because I was late night. I got to be at work at 8. But I just had to pot that question out to you. I was hoping that we would have got together with Bobby and Pisky and Pete, and I was going to ask them that question because I didn't know how to phrase it the right way. But if you compare the development,
what program has produced the best NFL players? There's your question. What program has produced the best NFL players? Florida State or Clemson?
Right. So that's something I wanted to ask you about. Terry Kennard that played with the Giants. I mean, and I don't even know. I don't even game about Clemson players because I'm a Clemson fan, and like I said, Jeff McCall.
Peter Warrick was a decent NFL player. Did you say Derek Brooks? Obviously a great all-time player.
Yeah, Chester McLaughlin, LeVar Kirkland was definitely a big-time player. But like I said, Trevor Price and Michael D. Perry, their careers is outstanding, and nobody ever talks about how good they were.
Fred Biletnikoff is a Pro Football Hall of Famer.
Sorry? I can't hear you.
Fred Biletnikoff's a Pro Football Hall of Famer. The Biletnikoff Award, Florida State.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just some of the names I would just run it down if you were to compare those teams, because obviously people would say, well, no, Florida State has had all this talent, but if you look at the pro level development, they have flamed out over the years. I mean, don't get me wrong. What's the guy that played with the Chargers? He just came out of Florida State a year or two ago.
Derwin James.
Joyner. Yeah, Derwin James. He's a monster.
Sure.
I mean, quarterback-wise, their quarterbacks. I'll let you go, Mark. But I did a comparison between Sammy Watkins and C.J. Spiller, who was the better player. Now, they played two different positions, but players. And Clemson, and their time period that was interesting. Both of them from Florida. Both got drafted by the Bills in the top 10, and both ran a 4.37. And I would just compare how similar they were. And all scrimmage yards, I think Spiller has Watkins by like 1,200 yards, but Watkins only played 3 seasons compared to what Spiller did. I did a comparison on those two. I call it a tell of the tape. So if you get a chance, check it out.
Okay. NFL.
All right, Mark, you have a good night, man.
Got NFL draft picks up here. All right. Very good. Thanks, DeAndre. I appreciate it.
Bye.
This is going to remind me of so many guys that I forgot about. Florida State all-time NFL draft picks. Of course, only one this past season, Cam Akers.
To decline.
Hello, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, it's McD, Sports 4. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, McD?
I'm doing good. It's tough to get into your show tonight with all these callers.
Yeah, people are fired up.
Yeah, people are fired up about Miami for some reason. I don't know why. I mean, they can't even win games against the Conference USA, so I don't know why people are fired up about them. But
it did, McD, before you go, it did give me a good idea, though, that, maybe I compare programs on here. People can give their suggestions and say, I'd like to see this program compared to that program, and maybe that's a series there. But Georgia, Miami, that's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
A good idea as well, but I'll get into that later. But Mark, the real reason I'm calling you is because I haven't spoken to you since this whole Big Ten, Pac-12 deciding to go ahead and do the conference-only schedules. And I know you did a show on Thursday. I would have called in that show, but I was offloading in remote areas, and I wasn't going to be able to get cell service. So I thought I'd talk to you about that now.
Yeah, what you got?
I don't know what the Big Ten and the Pac-12 are doing. I think it's the wrong move. I don't think I don't think that there's enough that backs them up over this. And B, it puts them at a big disadvantage if the Big 12, ACC, and SEC decide to do the non-con game. I don't like it one bit.
So you're saying if the other 3 conferences go ahead and play non-conference games, they'll have an advantage in terms of the playoff? They should.
No, they have a disadvantage.
Oh,
they have a disadvantage. The Big Ten and Pac-12.
Why? It depends how it's judged. See, McD, when you make a comment like that, understand that we're not talking about an objective system. We're talking about 13 people deciding 4 teams. We don't know how they're going to think about this. I would tend to say, you know what? You decided not to play non-conference games. These other 3 conferences are playing difficult games against other teams Therefore, we're going to side with them. We're going to give them a huge advantage in this process. That's the way I would view it.
Yeah, I'm going to give the ACC, the Big 12, and the SEC a big advantage over the Big 10 and Pac-12
Sure.
easily. And I'll come out and say this right now. If I'm the Big 10, if I was on the committee, the Big 10, those other three conferences decide to do non-con games, the Big 10 and the Pac-12 should be eliminated from any playoff discussion in 2020.
I understand your point. Let me think this one over.
Well, that should be every team on that schedule, 56-0. They should be eliminated.
Well, let's say the season plays out and the Big 12, the ACC, the SEC play non-conference games against each other. So it would all depend because let's think about this. Those three conferences can't play the other two. So we've already seen what games have been eliminated. So is Alabama going to replace the game against USC?
They're going to replace with TCU since TCU had a game against Cal.
Okay, well, if they make up the games, the big games that they're going to miss in the non-conference, I can see your point. If they're just going to go ahead and play, if Alabama's just going to go ahead and play 3 group of 5 teams in their non-conference, that's not going to show me anything or prove anything to me.
True.
But if they can fill those slots with legitimate games against big conferences between the 3 of them, they can work it out. That's an interesting point you're making. I'm trying to come up with a reason not to support you in this, McD, but I'm not coming up with one. I would think about shutting out the Big 10 and the Pac-12 as well to say, I understand you did what you did. You thought it was the best move. You're trying the safety of the players. But let's say the season's played. There are no huge issues. Well, you didn't take the risk and you didn't compete at the highest level with the rest of us. Therefore, you're going to have to sit on the sideline for this playoff. And you choose the second best team out of the 3 conferences, the best second place team to fill the 4th spot. You know, like
Absolutely.
an SEC championship game loser kind of thing.
Absolutely.
I'm not going to argue with you on this one.
Go ahead.
I'm not going to argue with you on this one, McD.
Okay.
I can't say that I've fully vetted it out, but it seems reasonable to me.
I mean, I first heard this when I was off-roading, and I was flipping out over it because tell me how this makes sense, Mark. Maryland had 2 non-con games against Towson, which is an in-state school, and West Virginia on the road, which is a 3-hour bus ride. We can't play West Virginia, but we can go on a bus and take an 11-hour bus trip to Chicago to play Northwestern. Tell me how that makes sense.
Okay, this is the reason it makes
sense. It's so-called one regional.
Yes, McD. It does make sense. I understand your point. I had the same thought initially. So what I was doing at the time, I was recording segments, and all of a sudden, boom, on my phone, a bunch of people hit me up. The Big Ten's canceling non-conference games. So I immediately just, bam, set up a live stream, started talking. I didn't have time to think about it, read about it, do anything. And my initial thought was the same thing. First example out of my mouth was Iowa plays a big game, non-conference against Iowa State. It's a big tradition. It's a big rivalry. That is the closest game that they're going to play. That's the closest of their 12 games. Why are they canceling that game? Ohio State's first games against Bowling Green, they're like an hour and a half away. On and on and on and on and on. All sorts of examples. And that was, I had the same initial thought. But I started to talk. As I talked and thought it through while I was speaking and conducting the call-in show, it hit me. Okay, the reason a conference would do this is to control factors, to control the environment. A conference the Big Ten, for example, cannot dictate what the MAC is going to do and what Conference USA and what the SEC and what the other conferences are going to do in testing players, housing players, traveling players. They can't control that. They can control and set up guidelines within their own conference and say, we've got 14 schools, we've got 14 football programs, we're all going to do the same thing. And these are what we believe are the best safety measures, and we can control this. And that's far more important than this bus ride's longer than that bus ride, or this plane flight is longer than that plane flight. I had the same thought initially. I had the same thought.
Continue. Okay. Well, Mark, you're right and wrong at the same time. Everything you said is correct. I can't argue against it. But you want to know what my counter to that would be?
Bring it on.
They are all following EDC guidelines. All of them. The same guidelines.
CDC guidelines.
CDC. I call it EDC sometimes.
I got
mixed
you.
up, but yeah. That will be my counter to that. They are all following CDC guidelines. I mean, everything you said was correct, but they're all following CDC guidelines.
You've read that, or you're assuming that they are?
I'm assuming that they are. I mean, a lot of coaches came out and said that's what we're doing.
We'll also understand, and we could take this to all sorts of rules and guidelines concerning programs, and this happens all the time where the NCAA will come out and investigate a program and have certain restrictions placed down or disciplines, and then the school or the conference will come down and say, yes, we're abiding by those, but we have stricter guidelines and we want to do X, Y, and Z, and we're going to self-discipline this program because we have higher standards. So that could be part of it too.
And you're correct by that. But at minimum, every team, I think, is following EDC guidelines. So
Sure.
that's why I don't
think
really
so.
see a problem. I know UCLA, I know they had an issue, the players at Chip Kelly, possibly not following EDC
Yes.
guidelines. So,
I
mean,
think
something like that's happening, yeah, you got to act on it. But
I believe that these conferences, talking about the Pac-12 and the Big 12, and we'll see what the other ones decide, are also determining that they've seen the tests come back positive ever since the players hit campus, and they're thinking, if we've got 15 weeks to play a football season, and we typically only have one bye week, and we fit in 12 weeks, 12 games in 13 weeks, what do we do if we have similar results to what we've seen since June 1st when these players have been on campus? What are we going to do? We're going to be canceling games left and right. We need some kind of buffer. Therefore, we're only going to play 9 or 10 games. And we're going to have all these buffer weeks where we can have some flexibility and say, okay, Indiana can't play Penn State this week because there were too many positive tests, but we can move that 4 weeks in advance when these tests come back and the players get healthy and they're ready to go and they pass their quarantine, and we can reschedule that game. They gives them flexibility with dead weeks.
I get that. I get that.
I hate McD, for as long as you've been listening to me, and know that I want to see non-conference games for just the sheer enjoyment of watching the teams play, but that we've got something to talk about in regards to comparing these conferences and having a healthy debate about the college football playoff and who's got the best conference and who's playing the best football. We're not going to have that possibly. I think that's going to be a huge takeaway, a huge negative to this season. In a season of negatives, it's going to be kind of boring. we're going to see all the teams play that we always see play, and we're not going to get to see Alabama and USC and Texas and LSU and Ohio State and Oregon, and we could go through a zillion games that we're not going to see some interesting matchups. We're going to see all the teams play that always play within their own conference. So I hate it too.
Now, I do think a good thing can come out of this, and I have one more. I'll think of my next. Whenever we talk next time, because I just realized I've been on for 13 minutes. I do have one. I do think one good thing can come out of this. I think what we're going to see after the season. No one's bringing this up, but I think we're going to see the SEC and the ACC get non-conference games after the season.
Run that last part by me. We're going to see them do what?
We're going to see them jump from 8 conference games to 9 conference games a year after this season.
Why do you think this season's going to have anything to do with their thought process?
Because they're going to play 10 conference games, and then they're going to realize, the SEC is going to realize that they're probably going to get 2 teams in the playoffs. And they're going to realize, if we can play more conference games, basically they have a better shot at getting more teams in the playoffs.
Okay. And you don't think Greg Schiano is a good coach?
Well, I've been through this already. If you look at all of his wins and his first 10 records in the Big East, the guy wasn't really beating anybody great. He was beating up on a bunch of mediocre teams.
Sure. So was the whole conference. The whole conference was
he
garbage.
might have 2, 3 good wins on his resume, but
Sure.
that's it.
The whole conference was bad and should not have had a BCS berth. And West Virginia was the only team on occasion that was a national team that could play some decent teams out of conference and win some big games. But the rest of the conference was garbage.
Mm-hmm.
In comparison to, when I say garbage, I try not to use that term because they're athletes and they do a great job. But in regards to being an elite, where the team that wins the conference should be an elite team, that was never the case in the Big East. So it's good that Big East football is no more.
Yeah, but that was my point there. But yeah, Mark, I'm going to let you go. I just want to give you my 2 cents on this whole conference only schedule. Thanks for taking my phone call. Go Terps. We'll go 10-0.
Appreciate that, McD. Have a good one. Our man McD getting the job done there. Always brings a good point to the table, and I can't disagree with him on this one. Leaving out the Big Ten and the Pac-12 out of, regardless of what happens. Let's say you've got Ohio State, they go 10-0. You've got Oregon, they go 10-0. And let's say you've got a 2-loss SEC winner, 2-loss ACC winner. Let's put together a situation that's just begging for the College Football Playoff Committee to allow the Big Ten and the Pac-12 to participate in the College Football Playoff, still eliminating those teams. Interesting. MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
This is the intern, Sean. I just had two quick things.
Sure.
Bringing off a point back on the last caller, a reason that the SEC and ACC might want to change conferences, not to get more teams to the playoff necessarily, but to make more money. You have more conference games. People are going to rather watch a conference game on TV. You're going to sell more tickets rather than an FCS game, usually scheduled right before the end of the year, rivalry week, which is when they have those, cupcake teams.
Absolutely.
But, they're going to lose a lot of money this season. So getting an extra conference game might actually boost your revenue for the season because they're going to probably have to make up for it.
Yeah, I think a little bit more accurately, but I completely agree with your point, and you're correct, is in this particular season, it's not like they'll make more money. They will lose less money. Let's put it that way. So the TV contract is going to be compromised. So these teams are making most of their money, and the programs are making, and the conferences, most of their money on TV. The gate's gone. we expect the gate to be gone. It would be a miracle, and I shouldn't say a miracle. It's improbable right now that we're going to see fans at the games, but maybe we will. Maybe we'll see 10 or 15,000 fans at games. I hope so. I hope we get to a place where we can do that. That the TV contract they're going to be compromised, so that the networks and the conferences are going to have to work that out. But yes, taking a Middle Tennessee game out of the mix and replacing it with another conference game for an SEC or ACC team boosts TV ratings exponentially. Yes, if Clemson plays North Carolina instead of playing the Citadel, yes, many more people watch it. They can sell more advertising, and the network makes more money. Therefore, they can pay the conferences more, and they can cut a deal. But in this particular season, it's just meaning that they're going to lose less because these conferences are going to take a bit of a beating this year. But football is going to bail them out if they can have some semblance of a season. Yep.
Yeah, I was talking about like for next year, the future.
Oh, okay.
Maybe not this year because it would probably be hard to reschedule. Or I guess they are rescheduling to add other teams to your schedule. But I'm talking about for future years, moving from 8 to 9.
Well, the way the Big Ten's approaching this season, they're going to tear it to shreds and reschedule the whole thing. It appears that's what I'm being told.
Okay.
But you're right.
Well, then maybe they could.
Certainly, if you've heard Nick Saban comment about it, he is all for playing 9 conference games.
Yeah.
Which is a bit surprising to his credit.
That has to be done just for college football.
And another downside to that, as you well know, is you've got a 14-team league in the ACC and the SEC, and you play 8 conference games. Therefore, you're missing 5 teams, and it makes the scheduling a great disparity between qualities of schedules. And I posted many videos tearing apart the SEC and the ACC in particular. And then the other issue is that because you have a designated division opponent on the other side, you're rotating the other opponent between 6 other schools. Therefore, you don't play these teams for 6 years in your own conference.
Yeah.
It's a problem.
Yeah. And then Notre Dame's really the only team that's not necessarily going to be hurt. The whole reason they don't join a conference, is because they have the television contract with NBC.
Yep.
Lots of people mix that up. Like, I see a lot of people on TV, on YouTube, or on Twitter, why does Notre Dame join a conference? The answer to most everything is, well, because of money, not because they're scared of a conference championship game. It's because of the television contract that they have. They'll be doing just fine this year, most likely.
Yeah, under my scenario, they wouldn't be. But yes, the ACC is going to appease Notre Dame and allow them to play a full conference schedule, it appears at this point.
Yeah, I can't believe that they're not taking advantage of that and just trying to force them in. But I feel like if they tried to do that, then Notre Dame would just be out. I don't know the details on their NBC contract, but I know that it's a lot of money to give up, for potentially joining a conference. Because once they join a conference, you can't have an independent television contract with NBC anymore. That's gone. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't run the numbers to see what kind of slice of the pie Notre Dame would have if they joined the ACC, which is obviously, I got to think that the ACC has a sweeter deal for Notre Dame now than they did just a couple of years ago with the advent of the ACC network and the money that generates. And I should be in the know about that in particular for certain reasons based on my career. But anyway, I do know that the SEC was and has been just an enormous success, the SEC network. The ACC to a lesser degree, but still a cash cow and another source of revenue in broadcasting football and basketball, but football in particular, another several national games every Saturday.
All right, so I got one last question. I'll hang up right after I ask it. But what do you think about expanding the playoffs just for this year? Because we may have schedules that are just 8 wins, just 9 wins, or, there might be a lot more teams we see undefeated or just with 1 loss. It might be difficult to determine a conference champion. So do you think that this year, would they probably wouldn't because they don't want to have that many games, but do you think that it would be a good idea, hypothetically, to expand the playoffs? Because, normally by week 8 or week 9 of the college football season, we don't really know who the top 4 teams are. They haven't really carved themselves out. Like a couple of years ago in the BCS era, Dak Prescott and Mississippi State were ranked number 1 around that time. So, I just don't know how they're going to determine the 4 when we're probably going to have a lot of teams with winning records, with such small schedules.
Let me ask you one question before you bid us adieu, and thank you so much for the call. Of course. How long have you been watching me?
A long time.
Oh, okay. All right. You should be able to anticipate my answer about the college football playoff. All right.
So you don't want to, but I'm against expanding the playoffs.
Oh, okay.
Just
No. The reason I hesitated was you said you were asking your
year.
question and hanging up. That's the reason I hesitated.
Yeah, I was, but then you asked that. But I also I don't think that expanding the playoffs fixes anything. You're just going to get more blowouts, more teams that don't belong. Because at the end of the year, there are really 3 teams that belong. There's always 1 team that doesn't, or in some cases, there's 1 team that's above them all. LSU last year was above them all. Clemson, when they beat the crap out of Notre Dame and Alabama, they were no fluke. So, expanding is just going to make more beatings that are just not that fun to watch, honestly, and teams that just don't belong. But I was just saying for this year and this year only, just because of the circumstances.
Well, I would say that this past season was the only year in which we had a situation where it was clear cut as to which 4 teams should make the playoff, even though I believe that every conference champion should be in the playoff. I was an opponent of the playoff format from the time it was announced, because my initial response was, we've got 5 conferences. We've got 4 slots. How does that work?
Yeah,
I hate the playoff.
I totally get that.
I hate the playoff. The only good that the playoff has produced is that it affords 2 other worthy teams an opportunity to play for the championship. So by nature, just giving more opportunities is a better thing, to a certain extent, of course. We don't want 32 teams in the playoff, because before we had 2 teams, and now we're selecting 4 teams, and we have 5 conferences, and some would argue 10 conferences, plus independents. And aside from this past season in 2019, it's easy to make an argument every year and to say that there were teams left out of the playoff that had just as good an argument and resume as teams that were included in the playoff. So 5 out of 6 years, we've had an argument, a controversy that has not been determined by an objective system. It's determined by 13 individuals.
Yeah, I get that. I just I don't know. I feel like there's definitely, like, you have to find some middle ground with it. Like with a lot of things, there might not be much of a clear answer, other than I think it's better than the BCS, at least the computer system, and then the teams that got in. But you can always try to make it better, or try to stop the bleeding if something is happening. But I just don't know.
Well,
I really don't know. The NFL has it set up really well, but we couldn't do a playoff like that. And that's a little different. Pro sports is a lot different.
Well, the NFL incorporates a playoff that includes like 35% of the league to make the playoff.
Yeah. Yeah. And then FCS also has a pretty good system. But I don't really know. I was just saying for this year alone to just expand it, just because by the end of the year, you know, after only playing 8 or 9 games, we're going to have more teams that are undefeated or 1 loss.
Yes. So from that standpoint, it should be expanded. And in my view, it should be expanded, period. But yes, from a competitive standpoint, I made this comment the other day during our Ohio State Live. I made the same comment that if you're just looking at fairness of competition, because especially if they play in total silos and don't play any conference games or non-conference games, how in the world do you judge these teams? And so the playoff should be expanded. But at the same time, look at what's happening. We are eliminating games and eliminating travel because of a safety concern. Therefore, I don't see the playoff expanding.
Yeah, that was my thought. I just thought it would be something cool to make the game a little bit more interesting this year. Well, thanks for having me on.
Appreciate the call.
Press 1 to start the call or 2 to decline.
Hey, it's MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Yeah, who's on the line?
It's NBA fan.
NBA fan, how are you?
I'm good. What about you?
I'm good. What's going on tonight? Hello, what's on your mind tonight?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I gotcha.
Can you hear me?
Uh-oh.
Okay.
Are we having a phone issue?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, I was on Bluetooth and it disconnected. Sorry about that. But yeah. So just about this whole season, I mean, just from the fact that I think it's like it'd be good to have just from the fact that we're sports hungry, but from like a historical perspective, you know, like if we stay with the 14 playoffs and you know there's no out of conference games or anything like that, you could argue that a lot of teams could potentially feel slighted or that they didn't have the requisite opportunity to get into the playoffs if they had similar records of teams from other conferences. So, and then it could get sort of like, you know, back in the 1900s where everybody was claiming, like each team's playing national titles in a year. Like, so what do you think about how this season will be represented if we go with the 14 playoff format? Do you think we just throw this season out, or what do you think about it?
In terms of what the committee's going to do?
No, in terms of how we view it.
Oh, how we view it.
Like, how teams view, like, they want a national championship this year or something like that. Like how they hold records.
Well, because there is a playoff with 4 teams, that legitimizes it much more than if this happened 25 years ago and nobody played non-conference games and then there was a poll vote at the end of the year. Then that would be completely decided on conference games and there's no ability to compare the conferences. But at least in this situation, what I think the committee is going to do is they're going to select the 4 teams with the 4 best records. And I'm speculating that there are no conference games, no non-conference games, and everybody's just playing in a silo, that they're basically going to select, you know, if it works out easy for them, let's say, and there's 4 undefeated teams and there's one loss conference champ, then they just eliminate them and they do what they did last year and it's clear cut. And then they play the 4-game playoff and we probably see some good football games. And I don't think there's going to be that much tarnish on the national championship. because there is a playoff, if that's what you want to call it, or an invitational.
Let's say like there's like multiple one-loss teams in the SEC, and then you got a one-loss Oregon as the conference champ. You know what I'm saying? And then everything else plays out pretty uniform. You know what I'm saying? Like, at a certain point, both of those teams have an argument as to why they'd be in the playoffs, but one of them won't. So they'll, you know what I'm saying? They'll feel like they didn't get a requisite opportunity to perform in that situation. You know what I'm saying?
So your scenario is that, let's say the Pac-12 has a one-loss champion, and then there are 4 teams with one loss in the SEC. Well, the committee, if there are no non-conference games played, the committee's going to go with the conference champions. They're going to have to. They'll just have to.
They said that all non-conference weren't being played. So, like the Big Ten, they're not doing it. But I don't.
Well, we've got 2 different scenarios playing out here. If 3 conferences, meaning the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 12, play non-conference games, then they will have a huge advantage in the selection process for the playoff, I would think, because they will have risked losing games against good opponents playing each other. And so the committee, if I were on the committee, I would give much more favor and an advantage to those teams that played difficult non-conference games versus the Big Ten and the Pac-12 that played no non-conference games. So that's one scenario. The other scenarios, if the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 12 fall in line with the decision made by the Big 10 and the Pac-12 to play no non-conference games, then everybody's in the same boat. Everyone's just playing conference games. There's no way to compare the conferences, no way to compare these champions. And I see the committee with no way of doing anything except selecting the 4 teams with the best record. And then if there's a tie, they have to make a judgment call as to which team was more dominant against its schedule. Because there's no way to determine which conference is better. This year, if they don't play non-conference games, there's no way to logically, you can look at the games and watch the games and say, well, the SEC is better than the Pac-12 just because they look better. But there's no results to point to make a logical conclusion if they only play conference games. There's no way you can make an argument based on results that one conference is better than the other because nobody's playing each other. So you have to go with the 4 teams that have the best record.
Right.
And then if there's the tie, you have to go with the team that was more dominant against its schedule.
Right. But for a team like Oregon, like let's say they get through their regular season. Let's say we go with the second scenario where every conference cancels its non-conference game.
Yep.
And then a team like Oregon, they leave the situation. They leave their conference with 1 loss.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And then you have 2 one-loss SEC teams, right?
Okay.
So in a scenario like that, we can act like we don't really like. You can see an argument on both sides, like the game.
I can't.
Played, but
I can't see the argument on both sides. So follow me here, NBA fan. If I'm understanding your scenario, Oregon's the Pac-12 champion with 1 loss. Pick your SEC champion. Who is it?
I'll go Bama.
Alabama's the SEC champion with 1 loss. And so you've got some other SEC team with 1 loss, okay? Whoever. Georgia.
Right.
Okay. What are you saying that there's going to be some kind of controversy or some kind of difficult decision to make between Oregon and Georgia?
I think that
there's really not. I understand if you're just talking of. Hang on just a second, NBA fan. Let me finish my point real quick. Let me finish my point. If we're just going to sit here and talk about what teams are better, yes, there's an argument because there will be people, maybe including myself, that are going to say Georgia's better than Oregon We all know that. Didn't we watch the games? They looked better. They're better than Oregon. They played a bunch of better teams than are in the Pac-12. They're better. Just like I said at the end of last season, I said, you know what? Oklahoma's not the fourth best team in the country. There are teams in the other conferences that are better than Oklahoma, and Alabama's one of them. They're going to beat Michigan by 4 touchdowns. They're better. They would play LSU a better game. They already have. They should be in the playoff. If we were just going to say, Mark, select the 4 best teams, then yeah, I'm going to go back to last year at the end of the season and say, kick out Oklahoma and put in Alabama. They're not going to get embarrassed and be losing by 5 touchdowns at halftime against LSU. But we don't do things entirely that way. And especially since they're not playing any non-conference games, there's no way that the committee can say, we're going to take a second-place team from one league that has the same record, and we're going to elevate them over a conference champion. And there were no non-conference games played. None. You just can't do that. You can't assume one conference is better than the other. There has to be some proof. And without any non-conference games, there is no proof.
Yeah, I hear you and I feel you, but so are we just gonna ignore everything that goes into college football, like on a in like a more like a concrete way that happens over years, like recruiting? You know what I'm saying? They systematically recruit better than everybody in the country. You can talk about potential draft every year. You know what I'm saying? Like, we can point to tons of factors that would make the argument better for Georgia that they played a harder. You know what I'm saying? That they had a more intense. You see what I'm saying? So, you see how at least both sides say that they were slighted in a way that is valid enough for there to be some type of validity questions on the championship of the team who made it this year?
NBA fan, I understand your point. I'm not saying it's a bad point. I just made it for last season. I sat here at the end of the conference championship games and said, you know what? Oklahoma's going to get annihilated. Alabama's better than them. I know they lost 2 games, but they're better. But no, Oklahoma earned the spot. They won the conference. They only had 1 loss against Alabama's 2. It wasn't an argument. I didn't argue that we should put Alabama in. I was just saying they're better. It's just like if we went back through every year of the college football playoff, if we were sitting here in 2015, I was flat out saying Michigan State, of course, they won the Big Ten. They beat Ohio State head-to-head. They earned a playoff spot. But you know what? Ohio State's better. They're not going to go to the playoff and lose by 38 points to Alabama. They've got an NFL team. So, yes, if this scenario played out the way you're talking about, yes, there'd be plenty of people that would be saying the second best team in the SEC is better than the Pac-12 champ. They should be in the playoff. I understand that, and I might be one of them. But the committee, I would go crazy if they're going to ignore a conference champion if there's no non-conference games. If there are non-conference games played and the Pac-12 shows that they suck and they lose every meaningful non-conference game against Notre Dame and Ohio State, and if all those games would have been played, yes, absolutely. But there's no non-conference games being played. So the College Football Playoff Committee would be making a huge jump to leave out a conference champion in favor of a second-place team from another conference. Then they're basically saying we have no rules. We're just selecting whoever we want, is what they're basically saying at that point.
Mm-hmm. So would you would like respect the argument of a person who's like, okay, Bama's number 1 team in the nation. They lost to Bama in week 4 by 3 points. They've been peaking since then. Oregon has been winning their games, but at the same time, you see what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying, and I agree. But with no non-conference. But one more point here, NBA fan. With no non-conference games played, who's to say Alabama's the best team? Just because if they've got the same record as Oregon.
It's been better for the past 2 decades. I mean,
Oh, because Alabama was better in like 2012, that we're going to say that they're better now?
They've been okay. So
Like,
they haven't been better since Nick Saban got there.
so now we're
They're like nothing.
we're evaluating teams in 2020 based on what they did in 2009.
Or 2019, or how they've recruited since like 2007.
That's how we're going to select playoff teams.
I'm not saying that's how they're going to select it. I'm just saying there's going to be. I guess we're circular here. I just wanted to say that.
I understand your point. Again, I was the guy sitting here once the playoff was selected saying Oklahoma's going to get their tails kicked. They don't compete with the other three teams, and they're going to get annihilated. And Alabama, if you held a gun to my head or you said you need to bet $10,000 on this game and Alabama's going to play Oklahoma, I'd say I'll take Alabama. But they didn't earn their right into the playoff. That's what I'm saying. And the committee still goes by some semblance of rules.
Right. Okay. So my last question to you would be just about like recruiting and everything. So with the situation we got going on right now, we haven't been able to have the normal things that go on in recruiting. We haven't had any rankings just based off their performance in camps and things like that, where they're matched up against premier talent at opposing positions and everything like that. So do you feel like this 2021 class is going to be more of a question mark in terms of what they actually are as players relative to other years?
Absolutely. There's less information, there's less data. So I don't know where we stand. I don't follow high school football to know what decisions have been made or are still out there about playing high school football. But certainly if they're not going to play high school football this year, then the recruiting game becomes much more of a guessing game, and they have to rely on old data. They have to rely on camps. They can't rely on actual football being played on the field to make evaluations.
Right. And then another thing is, like, we've missed out, like, junior year camp for recruits, or, like, right after junior year recruiting for, like, juniors and everything like that, turning seniors. That's the most pivotal time in terms of when you're changing your rankings with camps. And those are all gone.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? So, I just wanted to
oh, absolutely.
Input on that.
Yeah.
All right, yeah. Thanks for taking my call, Mark.
No, I appreciate it. Good stuff out of you folks tonight. People are fired up. You guys are focused tonight. Delivering some good stuff here at MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Boy, I wrote a bunch of stuff down here that I wanted to address. I haven't gotten to it. That's fine. All right.
Press 1 to start the call or 2 to decline. The call will
I
start.
had myself one of those good days where even though I spent it alone and didn't have any interaction, it was a beautiful day. I went out, took the basketball down to the court, shot some hoop, had my little yoga session here, had some good food, got some things done for the channel here. Anyway, MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
I'm wondering if you were just describing your 4th of July day.
My 4th of July day? I was describing what?
You were describing a nice day you just had, but I think I missed the first part.
Yeah, it was just today. I had nothing to talk about for a few
a lot
seconds
less
there.
Interesting.
I
By
usually
the way,
don't share too
I'm not
much.
sure if my voice is distinguishable, but I'm just a reasonable guy.
Yeah, I caught that after a couple words out of your mouth, but yeah. I don't typically share much about my personal life because it's not very interesting, but I just felt like it for a few seconds there. But I'm guessing that you've been kicking back, taking in these calls. So I'm anticipating.
These long-winded calls, man. These guys got a lot to say.
People are fired up tonight. Yeah. It's a lively show.
I'm going to try and be a little more laser focused and just hit a couple topics with you and then get off so people don't get too bored. So one thing I want to clear up from about two callers earlier, Notre Dame not joining a conference has zilch to do with money. Their TV deal with NBC, I know you said you didn't run the numbers, so allow me to educate you a little bit.
Sure.
Their TV deal with NBC is 7 games a season for $15 million. The Big Ten right now currently has the biggest deal going on with Fox. It's almost $400 million, split between 14 schools. I think they're getting, I mean, you could do the division on it, but I think they're getting like $30 million a school
Yep.
or something.
That sounds about right.
That's Rutgers, by the way. Rutgers' TV deal is bigger than Notre Dame's.
Wait a minute. So let's understand.
The SEC is about to sign the same thing, or a similar deal with ESPN once CBS's deal runs up.
So let's
So
understand
I'm not
that.
saying Rutgers or any of these schools out-earn Notre Dame. Obviously, Notre Dame has a lot more just being who they are. But if it's just TV deal alone that we're worried about, that's a no. No one cares about their NBC deal anymore.
Well, you've given
if
us.
they wanted to join the big. Go ahead.
You've given us some numbers there, but that doesn't complete the whole TV structure there, because Fox is only one partner with the Big Ten, and it's the major one, but there are still ESPN, ESPN2, and ABC games. There's a partner there.
But going forward,
with the Big Ten.
ESPN is going to be solely affiliated with the SEC once their deal kicks in. And trust me, Fox is going to move in and own pretty much all rights to the Big Ten.
Well, I'm just talking about currently, and then you of course have a Big Ten network component, which is minor compared to the other two, but you still have an ESPN large contract with the Big Ten, and of course Notre Dame plays 5 other football games in addition to the 7 home games with NBC. And those are ABC, ESPN games as well. So I don't know what that does to your numbers. So
all
those
I'm
are
just
partial
saying
numbers.
is that if people keep talking about that, they keep citing the only reason for Notre Dame not joining is because of their TV deal with NBC. I mean, it's comparing pennies to quarters at this point. But if they joined the Big Ten, the ACC might be different. I don't know. I'm not really seeing that I don't think their ACC network is breaking in a lot. They don't have any sort of exclusive deal with any big TV publisher. So maybe that's different. But I think we all know at heart Notre Dame's a Big Ten school. So if they wanted to join, if they wanted to actually be in a position where they're making the most money, they would have joined the Big Ten around 2015 when they really started raking it in with Fox. That's not why. You and I both know why. It's because they're Notre Dame and they think they're better than you. That if you ask any Notre Dame fan, he'll proudly tell you that. They don't care about the money. They're Notre Dame. They're better than you are. They don't need a conference. And the playoff committee has proved them right. So I honestly don't blame them. You can't blame the game. You can't blame the player. You got to blame the game. And the playoff committee and the ACC has made this too easy for them. If I was Notre Dame, I'd be doing the same thing. I wouldn't join a conference while no one's making me.
But if your numbers are correct, Reasonable Gump, would you not want to make the most money? Not that would be the only factor in your decision, but wouldn't you rather join a conference and make a lot more money?
I would, and yeah, I guess when I put myself in that position, I switched my mentality to decide the priority. I think Notre Dame's priorities are more in line with their tradition and just being who they are. I kind of think they've realized that with all their academic standards and just the way the sport has progressed in athletics and recruiting and all, they're never going to be the Notre Dame they were in the 60s and the 70s again.
Well, because
so I think
of
they're
that,
holding on to their last vestiges of that, which is being that program, the independent program.
exactly. Because otherwise, they just become somebody else. They just become like everybody else.
Someone else. You're right. So yes, they would make a lot more money if they joined the Big Ten. I don't even think that's arguable. I can't sit here and list off every single numbers, and if I did, everyone on your channel would hang up right now.
Oh, the Big Ten. But I got to think that the ACC contract isn't nearly as big as the Big Ten contract because,
No,
as
it's
you
not.
know,
No,
the
it's
Big
not.
Ten and the SEC make a lot more money than the other three.
I would entertain an argument that the Notre Dame might lose a little bit of money if they did join the ACC, but then again, that's part of the reason probably why they didn't go fully in with the ACC. They just signed their little kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out deal. But yeah, just so everyone out there knows, if Notre Dame really wanted to make a quick buck, they would join the Big Ten. If that was their priority, which it is not.
And from a football
the
standpoint,
NBC deal has nothing to do with them not joining the conference. Absolutely nothing.
yeah, and for anybody that's watched me for any considerable amount of time, you know my thoughts on it. Notre Dame should be in the Big Ten. Notre Dame is
I think it's one of your and mine favorite pastimes, trashing Notre Dame in the ACC.
And I posted a video right after the ACC, the Big Ten and the Pac-12 made its decisions, and it appears as though the ACC is going to fall in line. I went on a rant, and I was so passionate about it that I'd been working all day and all night, walked in here at 5:15 in the morning after working all night, and I still had to shoot a video to rant for 8 or 10 minutes that Notre Dame, well, the rant, as you just pointed out, is less about Notre Dame, because more credit to them. If they get away with doing these things, that's not their fault. It's more about the ACC not having enough dignity and self-respect for its football product to say, we will let somebody use us so we can make money, and it's a win-win situation, but we don't have the self-respect or dignity for our football product to demand that somebody fully joins our conference or they don't join our conference. Can you imagine the SEC doing that?
The sad part about it, Mark, was back then the ACC wasn't what it is now. The ACC had some respectable programs, and I would have put them right there with kind of like the Big 12. Maybe a little bit behind the Big 10. Ohio State wasn't what it is now quite yet.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's not like it would be today's ACC just desperate for any sort of attention at all, other than Clemson. Like, they had negotiating power, and they felt like Notre Dame apparently had more. It's so sad.
Plus, also the ACC commissioner, I made this point in the video, that this is his last sports season. And I would think, even if this guy could care less about his conference, and I'm not saying that's his viewpoint, I'm just saying, let's say he's the most selfish man on the planet, I would think, you know what? I want to establish my legacy, and I want to be the guy that pulled the power play that forced Notre Dame's hand and demanded that they join the ACC so we will save your football season in 2020 and save you millions of dollars, but you have to join our conference. Otherwise, we're not playing you this year because we've decided to play no non-conference games. And that guy could be a legend and a hero for decades to come because he would be the guy that forced Notre Dame to join the ACC.
Mm-hmm. Well, dare to dream, Mark. Only in dreams.
What's
man.
he got to lose? That
All
would
right.
be my stance. What do I got to lose? They say no, and I'd screw them and say, we're not playing you this year.
And you make sure when you make the next rant video, come up with some sort of cool title, like, is Brian Kelly insane? And just come up with something similar to that, because it'll probably get a lot of views.
Yeah, I forget what I named it. I already shot the video. If I posted the video, I think I just basically said ACC, I don't remember what I called it. It wasn't anything, yeah.
So two quick topics here real quick. So first, someone mentioned something about Bama replacing USC if the Pac-12 follows suit with the Big Ten.
Yes.
I hope that doesn't happen. I hope Alabama shows up there when the USC doesn't show up. I hope he marked it as a forfeit.
Well, the Pac-12 has already decided not to play non-conference games.
Oh, they have? Oh, I thought it was on the Big Ten.
No, the Pac-12. That was my understanding. Let's make sure we double check this. I
had looked up, I Googled Alabama USC to see if there was any news on it. It said that both athletic directors still kept saying that their plan is to play the game.
Pac-12, really? Pac-12. I thought. Yeah, ESPN.com. What do Pac-12 and Big Ten decisions mean for college football? Meaning, ESPN.com. Pac-12 follows Big Ten in moving to conference-only schedule for fall sports 2 days ago.
All right, yeah.
Sure.
Well, yeah. I'm going to say a bit of news. Everyone just keeps talking about the Big Ten because, the Big Ten actually matters. Okay. Well, but anyway, so I hope we don't replace them. I hope we just mark it down as a forfeit.
Yeah, I don't think there are going to be any forfeits under this situation. I don't see that being part of the process by anyone.
All right. Well, one more thing.
Sure.
So I heard you, and this is just a little thing you probably said off the top of your head, but because my ears are so good, I caught it, and I'm going to ask you about it now.
I must have slipped up on something.
You said you were surprised that Nick Saban is in favor of playing non-conference games. What's surprising about that?
I'm just surprised because he's in a sweet situation in which his program pretty much is going to get the benefit of the doubt, and they've earned it. It is the best program in college football since 2008, and then why would he want to take on one more difficult game when the Alabama formula has been to play 3 lousy opponents, non-conference, and 1 either really good opponent or, in the case of the last 2 years, really marginal Duke and Louisville teams, to be kind, marginal Duke and Louisville teams, and that's been the formula. So why pick up a
kind? Would you say marginal?
Exactly. That Louisville team went 2-10.
I would have rather played 4 FCS teams and have Duke on our schedule. I mean, at least own it if you're going to do that.
So my point is, why pick up an additional SEC Eastern Division opponent that on occasion is going to be really good or at least decent, capable, just another top 25 to 40 team in the nation, most likely, whether it's Missouri or South Carolina or Florida at times, or Georgia. I just said I'm a bit surprised that he would be in favor of a 9-game season.
Well, I mean, I think people have asked him about like these big neutral site openers that, like you said, Alabama has sometimes against really. And he's always kind of said that, he believes in like and get them ready for the bigger and better stuff at the end of the season. So I think it's actually pretty consistent with what we've said all the time. Not that I would expect anyone else on this channel to actually know that, or that those are the kind of things he says.
But unless I'm missing something, Reasonable Gump, it sounded like he said that like Alabama plays some daunting schedule. I'm talking about non-conference schedule. Like they go out of their way to play some like ridiculously difficult schedule, non-conference.
Well, he was saying that what I was talking about was always specifically in reference to the conference, not the conference, the season openers, like against Michigan and USC, Wisconsin, those kind of things.
Doesn't everybody do that unless your name's Baylor?
You're asking me if every team plays some really big conference opener, or not? I keep saying conference season opener. No, most teams play a cupcake opener.
Well, I'm not talking about necessarily the opener, but we're at a point where there's only a handful of teams that play really lousy non-conference schedules. Other than that, out of the 75 Power 5 teams, everybody plays at least one respectable game, And there are schools now, and you've got a handful there in the SEC because they've got those traditional rivalries at the end of the season that actually tack on another difficult game. So where a Florida's playing a Florida State and a Michigan in the same season, or Georgia's playing Georgia Tech, and I know that they've been down, but Georgia Tech and Notre Dame in a given season. USC plays Notre Dame every year, plus they tack on Alabama or whomever.
You're right that that's kind of the norm now, but that was certainly not the norm back in 2008 and 9 when Alabama started doing this every year. No, that was absolutely not the norm.
I guess.
And those are kind of the years when he was asked, "Why do you keep doing this?" So yeah, I am kind of reaching back almost, an entire decade.
I don't have the specifics.
Hey, look, I've been on here, and I don't ever defend Alabama's scheduling. I mean, obviously it's getting better now. I think that just got ruined this year. But but for a while there, 10 years ago, no, Alabama was definitely ahead of most of the college football world when it referred to going out of their way to find a big opponent outside of the conference.
I don't
This
know.
was not the norm back then.
I don't know when Ohio State has not played those kind of games.
I didn't say it was. No one else was doing it.
You know, if you look through the 90s, they were playing Notre Dame and Washington and Miami and Texas into the 2000s and those kind of series back and forth, home and home. Actually, Reasonable Gump, I've got nothing to back this up in regards to data. And if I had nothing to do, and maybe if the college football season's canceled, I'll be doing this kind of stuff. My thought process, my perception is that the non-conference schedules have gotten much better as of late,
Right.
as you have mentioned, in the last 5 to 10 to 12 years, something in that range.
Right.
And prior to that, there were a lot of teams skating by, a lot of big teams playing absolutely no one. But if you go back to like the 80s, and this, my memory was revisited in going through some of these videos that I posted where I've looked at national championship races from 83, 84, 90, 91. Like Auburn's, their non-conference schedule in 1983 was ridiculous. So Auburn, they only played a 6-game SEC season then. So they had another 5 games to schedule. They had Texas, Florida State, Maryland was ranked in the top 10, and somebody else. They had like 4 of the 5 games were like loaded, like ridiculous opponents. And I saw a number of teams doing the same thing.
Sounds like the 80s were a good time for sport.
The 80s were really good because you know what was interesting was if we took, let's say, the 10 years of the 80s and listed every team and put some kind of criteria to contending for a national championship, what does that truly mean? What are the metrics for that? What does that scenario play out to be? And we could list 5 or 6 teams in every conference that at some point during the 80s competed for a national championship. And now we've got like 6 teams that compete for national championships, like for 5 and 6 year spans. And back then, you know, I'm talking about Illinois competing for national championships and Georgia Tech and Colorado and
oh yeah, well, a lot of people don't even realize Georgia Tech actually claims more titles than Georgia does. But
yeah.
In the 80s, though, there was not an actual even a game that had the label of national championship over it. The first one of that was in the 1993 Sugar Bowl, I want to say.
Yes.
So when you're saying competing for national championships, you're really taking like all the 4 big bowl games, and they're all worthy depending on which team wins and how good they win. They were all worthy of potentially claiming one for that.
Yeah, I'm basically saying
Whereas
that
once you got to 1993 and onwards, everyone knew it was only one or two. So I guess that's why it may have seemed more spread out in the 80s, because you could shoot the AP protocol and the coaches, the only people who chose those things back then. They had potentially eight different teams to choose from. Whereas from 1993 onwards, you only had two, except in weird cases like in 2003 USC.
I guess my point is more that there was more competitive balance, that we saw teams from, let's say, the Big Ten, like Illinois and Iowa, who actually competed and won conference championships on a fairly regular basis with like one-loss teams. So they were, in a sense, in the mix for a national championship late in the season. You know, Iowa was a number one team in the country in November in 1985. Illinois went 10-1 and went to a Rose Bowl as the number 4 team in the country in 1983. Like, this is not happening now.
I mean, I can tell you exactly why. The way it works now is it's all about recruiting. It's all about sports nutrition and sports science and training and stuff. I mean, just the fact that the big programs, the winning programs, the blue blood programs have the resources to funnel all of those things to them and basically exclude anyone else. Whereas back in the 80s, it was kind of similar, and before that, it was similar to kind of what college basketball is now, where it's just a crapshoot every year. You may get really good talented players, you may not, and so a lot of people like that kind of chaos. I'm not a big fan of it myself. It was actually, I guess, dynasties, like with, or like Bear Bryant's Alabama, or Woody Hayes' Ohio State. Those were seriously impressive during those times, because they didn't have all the stuff that we have access to now. They didn't have all these training records, and they couldn't afford sports scientists on their roster. They didn't know really all the science with recruiting and all those things. So, I mean, that's why everything is more narrow now, is because big programs like Alabama and Ohio State have all the money to make sure they funnel it towards them. Obviously, not all of it. You get the wealth gets spread around if you know how to recruit. But generally, it's going to stay, like what you said, with about 6 to 8 teams.
And I think it's boring. For as much as I love watching college football every Saturday, I think this kind of conversation, we've been talking about the same 4 or 5 teams for 5 or 6 years now.
Yeah, well, I mean, but it does help when you're a fan of one of those teams.
Well, yeah, and I shouldn't say that because I'm an Ohio State fan. I should actually be glad that the landscape looks the way it does right now, because that didn't happen in the 80s and 90s. Ohio State was arguably the best program in the Big Ten, but it wasn't just like you could drive off a cliff and to find the rest of the league. It just wasn't like...
I love that metaphor. That's great.
Does anybody who's watching not think Ohio State is by far the dominant program and roster in the Big Ten? The only reason Alabama, you can't make this, and the same for Clemson, obviously. And even though Oklahoma was down by 5 touchdowns at halftime to LSU, they still own the Big 12. And the same could be said of Alabama's been just as good and actually better than the other 2 programs I mentioned over the last 12 years, but it's only been because the SEC is so strong that there's been some challenge to Alabama. I just outlined the whole sport for over the last 6 to 8 years.
There was a brief period, 2014, 15, maybe a little bit of 16, where it was just Alabama and the Lost Boys. I stole that from a newspaper article. That was the headline, where all the other SEC teams were just nowhere to be found.
Yeah.
We managed to bridge. That was like the gap between when the SEC had won every single BCS title until Auburn messed it up, the last one. But that was the gap between that and where we are now.
Yeah,
and
14,
Alabama
15,
won
16, exactly.
15,
until Georgia emerged in 17.
The SEC wasn't immune to that, but we recovered a lot more quickly than everyone else.
Yeah, 14, 15, 16, exactly, until Georgia emerged in 17. And then, if that kick six wouldn't have occurred, then you're talking about 11 up until 17. You're talking about 2011 stretching all the way to 17. Yes, that Alabama dominated, or at least won the SEC, or was the best team.
All right, man.
Good stuff.
Let me go ahead and let you get out of here.
I appreciate it.
Are you tired at all? Do you get tired, or?
Oh, boy. Yeah, I get tired from time to time, sure.
All right. Well, I just wasn't sure if you had that, if there was something wrong with you or something. See you pop in on streams at like 2 in the morning, just out of nowhere.
What's funny is
which was fine back when I was on night shift, and I would just see you on.
What's funny is people that know me and people at work discover that I don't drink coffee, and they can't believe it. They cannot believe it. I never liked this stuff.
All right, man.
All right, Reasonable Gum. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, have a good night.
You too. All right, good stuff out of everyone here tonight. I would like to acknowledge Brian Baird, Super Chat contribution. Thank you so much. And BGPO Football Funk, Super Chat contribution from you as well. Thank you so much, DeAndre. And really, everyone, I want you to know that whether you're contributing... let me try to get this back. Hang on. What's going on? Be patient. There we go. Thanks for hanging in there.
The call will start at the beep.
Before I take this phone call, just want to let everyone know, again, of course, I acknowledge the Super Chat contributions because the financial contributions are going to keep us going and hopefully get us to a full-time status at some point. But whatever you can do, that if you enjoy what we do here in delivering college football discussion, debate, and analysis every day, do something, please. Like, if that's all you do, like the videos, comment, of course, as you do in the live chat, but also comment to the videos, share them out on social media, do what you can to get our viewership as high as possible. MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, it's Michael Hook. How you doing?
Hi, Michael. I'm doing just fine. How are you?
Not too bad. Just relaxing for Sunday night. Hey, I got a question. It's reference to what you talked about earlier with your videos last week with Notre Dame and stuff like that. Was Swafford this being his Swanson this year? Does he have the power to, if Notre Dame says no, we're not going to join the ACC, to say, okay, you're done with the ACC, go find another conference?
Okay, it's my understanding that, of course, Notre Dame does not have to join a conference. They have a deal with the ACC where they just agree to play football games, and they're a participant in the conference in the other sports. But as I understand it from several sources that I've read in just the last few days, that Notre Dame did sign a contract. There is a stipulation in the contract with the ACC that if Notre Dame chooses to join a conference, the ACC has right of first refusal, meaning that Notre Dame, if they join a conference, it must be the ACC, unless the ACC did not want them, and that's not going to be the case.
Mm-hmm. I was just wondering stuff like that. Now, what State and Pac-12 did last week, do you think the next Power 5 conference is going to be that says, okay, we're just doing a conference schedule? And do you think, with some of them having a 9-game conference schedule, that they might try to add one more game, or just leave it at 9 games?
Based on our conversations last week with our Ohio State contributors who were on the conference call, even though we are about a week to 10 days away from the Big Ten announcing its decision, it appears as though that the Big Ten will be adding a game to the conference schedule to play 10 games.
Mm-hmm. And another thing too is how do you think that's going to affect the not the Power Five, but the what's it like teams like UCF, Brigham Young, and Boise State? What they call it? I can't think what it's usually when they do this next six. I can't remember what it's called.
What, the group of five?
Yeah, I think that's what they call it. The group, not the Power Five, but the next thing underneath of it, like with Boise State or UCF playing in the bowl game a few years ago against like Michigan State, or I can't remember who. I'm trying to remember what they call it. I think it's the group of five.
Oh, you're talking about the New Year's Six games.
Yeah, thank you. How do you think that might affect it if you have like a whole bunch of teams that actually run the table this year, including the group of six?
Well, regardless of what is decided about the regular season, there's still a contract in place as to how the New Year's Six games are selected. And I wouldn't expect that would change. If they're still going to play those bowl games, then the group of five still has a place at the table as long as they have a team that meets the requirements, which I believe they can't have more than 2 losses. I think that's the stipulation.
Mm-hmm. I wasn't sure how that was working and stuff like that. You know, I'll say with everything that's been going on too, has this maybe like refigured your like with your premium videos of teams and stuff like that? Have you figured out, hey, maybe this might change and there might be some teams that might sneak up and have a shot to win conference championships or play the conference championship, or do you still going to be status quo?
Well, there's a great question right there, Michael, because I've weighed that back and forth in regards to what is all this chaos and uncertainty and change. How is that going to affect programs? Because on one hand, you would think, okay, this is going to be a crazy college football season in which we could see a number of upsets, and maybe there are going to be teams that emerge just based on circumstances that are really good teams, but not the elite. And maybe some of the elites will be compromised in certain ways, and maybe it'll just be a crazy season in which we're going to see results that we wouldn't have normally seen. But I tend to lean in the other direction, that if the teams with the best athletes, with the best coaches, with the most money, the best facilities, those teams put themselves in that position that under trying circumstances might be the best and the most equipped to deal with this kind of situation, to even extend their lead or their competitive advantage over everyone else. And also on top of that, we're not going to have packed out, rabid stadium settings and environments that lend themselves to big teams being upset on the road when they face a hostile environment. We're not going to have that.
Now, all the non-conference games like the UNC Alabama, Ohio State, and Oregon, Notre Dame, Wisconsin, I can't remember who Michigan's big non-conference game is. Which game was you actually looking forward to seeing the most?
Oh, out of all the games in the non-conference this season, well, as an Ohio State fan, of course, the game against Oregon. But let me take my fandom out of it and just talking as a college football analyst. I'm going to go a little bit deeper than the periphery games at the top. I was fascinated to watch North Carolina and to see how if they were ready for prime time, ready to challenge Clemson possibly and be the best team in their division. And they had 2 intriguing non-conference games scheduled against UCF and Auburn. And I was intrigued to see how North Carolina would play in those 2 games.
As for me, I was talking about the college Purdue game, but the 2 I was looking forward to was the Memphis game with Purdue and the Air Force game with Purdue. I was still trying to figure out. And also, how do you think Purdue will react? Sorry about that. How do you think Purdue will react having been a 4-3 defense in the past, with Bob Diaco being a new defense coordinator to 3-4, with Murray O'Neal and George Karlaftis coming back.
Well, before I answer that question, Michael, of course, I as soon as you jumped on the line, I identified, of course, you're a big Purdue fan. I am fascinated with Purdue football and history for a number of reasons I won't go into right now. But you mentioned your non-conference schedule, and I'm very impressed with Purdue's level of difficulty in the non-conference schedule, because even though they don't play a major power, they have 3 very difficult non-conference games in, as you mentioned, Air Force, Memphis, the best of the group of 5 teams last year that played Penn State very close in the Cotton Bowl, and the other games against Boston College, correct?
Yes.
Yes, so they packed out their non-conference schedule. They don't have any gimmies there. So I'm impressed with Purdue's approach to the non-conference scheduling. So I got to say that across the board that it's going to be difficult for any football program and coach that's installing a new system in which there was no spring practice, and now fall practice appears to be compromised to a certain extent. So that's just an extra challenge to be able to install a new offense or a new defense under these circumstances this year.
And there's thing I'm trying to figure out, with the month break between the home opener and then the games in October and stuff like that, how do you think most of the teams are going to do that? Do you think they're going to try to squeeze the game in, or just extended practices, or how's that going to work, you think?
Well, they got to stay within their guidelines of what's allowed by the NCAA. But so what are you asking, if they're going to play scrimmages?
No, it seems like you got like a 5-week break between, like, with Purdue, first game was Nebraska, and then their next game, which is in October. You got that big gap there.
Oh,
I didn't know if they were trying to do like as a training camp, or how's that going to work and stuff like that. And it's also, is there teams they might be able to fit 2 games in that time slot, or just 1?
Okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, so we have yet to hear what the Big Ten is going to announce in regards to a season, but it's my understanding that the Big Ten is going to launch its season, most likely, they have yet to announce, on the same weekend, because they want to build pockets of weeks, of bye weeks within the season, so that they can recover from any positive tests that impact certain teams. So the season's still going to end. And again, this is all speculation. And the Big Ten presidents talked about this, but they didn't make a final decision, that the season is still going to start on time and end at the same time, but there are going to be gaps of more bye weeks within the season so that they can have some scheduling flexibility in case there are too many teams impacted by positive COVID tests. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and a couple other questions I'm trying to figure out. How good do you think Michael Penix could be with IU this year if he could stay healthy? And then also with Peyton Ramsey transferred to Northwestern, and I think was it Hunter Johnson was the quarterback that transferred also to Northwestern?
Yes.
Who do you see maybe getting the starting spot there, and how big of an impact do you think it'll be for Pat Fitzgerald?
So your first question was about Michael Penix, right?
Yes.
At Indiana. So I think this kid's an exceptional quarterback. I think he's really good. And unfortunately, he's, like everybody else, not going to be able to have that opportunity, and especially at the quarterback position, to be developed over the course of the workouts that they have postseason, going into spring practice, then individual workouts and all that. It is just crucial for any quarterback at a big-time program to continue their development. But I ranked my top 5 Big Ten quarterbacks, and I placed him at number 3.
3, I think. Wasn't it?
Yeah, I watched, kind of rewatched some stuff with him, and I think he's a dynamic quarterback and a dynamic player, and got to be one of the reasons why Peyton Ramsey moved on. So I think Indiana's got a really exciting situation at quarterback. Hunter Johnson, it was difficult to assess his play last year because Northwestern was so bad offensively that, in particular, I go back to the Stanford game. So that was their second game of the season. And this is before we really knew that Northwestern was going to have the disaster of a season that they had in going 3-9, coming off a Big Ten championship game appearance and a bowl win the year before. But they were so inept. And I must have watched Northwestern play at least 5 times last year. I watched the Wisconsin game. I saw the Stanford game. I saw the Purdue game. I saw a number of other games Northwestern played, Ohio State. They just had nothing on the perimeter that threatened the defense. They had good tight end play. They've had injuries at running back and really had no dynamic running back. I can't think of the kid's name off the top of my head. Oh, my goodness. Can't think of his name. But anyway, their lead running back last year, who was pretty much a fourth-string running back the year before, that was pressed into action because they had so many injuries at running back. Once Justin Jackson moved on to the NFL, and the next kid in line had a career-ending injury. He was a really good back. Can't think of his name off the top of my head, but had a neck or back injury that ended his career. So it was difficult to evaluate Hunter Johnson because he just had no chance. Just had no playmakers. Peyton Ramsey, though, from what I've seen of both of those guys, is a more elusive quarterback. He doesn't have the arm talent that Hunter Johnson has, but he certainly got more game reps and has achieved more success at the collegiate level. So I think it's a pretty fascinating battle for the job. And Peyton Ramsey on one level is a little bit behind, having not played in the system, but of course he's got to have 20 or 25 starts under his belt at Indiana. So I would think Ramsey's going to win the job. That would be my guess.
Final question with you. Who do you think would be more beneficial for Rondell Moore, David Bell, Dalton Wright, Jack Plummer, or Aiden O'Connell?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Michael, that's probably a question I should be asking you as a huge Purdue fan, having watched all those guys play. I've seen them all play, but not to the point where I've scouted them. So, my goodness, I don't know who would take advantage of Rondell Moore's ability more than anyone else. I got to think that the kid that's going to make the best decisions, whoever's the best, the most accurate passer and game manager, the mobility factor is not going to be much of a play an impact on Rondell Moore's numbers, I wouldn't think. If anything, it's going to take away from his numbers if they go with the most mobile of those guys. That's going to choose to run a lot of the time.
My thing is, I think Plummer's still be returning and stuff like that. I'm not sure how his ankle is after his surgery last year when he broke it. And I can't remember. I think it was in the Illinois game or something. But I think O'Connell somehow gets the job done. But the only thing that concerns me is his mobility and being able to get out of the pocket faster than Plummer does.
Okay. Yeah, I got to tell you, you guys had a down year last year, and anytime a team has a down year with me trying to watch as much college football as I possibly can, I'm not going to see as much of your games as I typically would. I don't know how much Purdue I watched last year, not nearly as much as I did the year before, to evaluate those quarterbacks.
Hey, Mark, thanks for your time, and I'll try to catch you next Saturday night, man.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.
Take care.
All right. I think we've hit the end of the line here. We're at 2.5 hours. I appreciate everybody who's taken part in the live chat, certainly. And again, my special thanks to Brian Baird and BGPO Football Funk for contributing. And do I take one more phone call? Yes, let's just not make it for 20 minutes. All right. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line? Who's on the line?
Hello, this is Marty, the Ohio State fan.
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah, Yeah, I think that was Friday. I hadn't started a Big Ten and the Pac-12 schedule.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it was 9 games overall and 9 conference games.
Yeah, they both have 9 game seasons. Yes, currently.
Yeah, that's what I want to know what you think about it. Ohio State plays Rutgers first.
Yes, sir. What's your question or comment? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. It's just difficult to hear you.
Okay, yeah, because I think, when the season all said and done, we're going to have a lot of at least 5 or 6 undefeated teams.
Yeah, so you make a good point there. With the limited number of games and a lot of these huge non-conference games being taken out of the mix, yeah, it just goes to make sense that there's a much higher probability that there are going to be undefeated teams. And we already had 3 last year.
Mm-hmm. Because I was saying that to myself, but I said, "Whoa, it won't be right." Because the season said it done. You have at least 5 or 6 undefeated teams. I don't know how to get it on. Get them in.
Well, we can't have more than 5 because they'll play in conference championship games.
It's only a 14 playoff. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's a possibility, but I'm not thinking that we're going to have all 5 conference winners undefeated. But it's possible.
Well, it's possible. I don't think it'll happen. But,
well, it's possible every year.
Huh?
It's possible every year.
Yeah. Yeah, Oregon, they're first game on September 26 at Colorado. Yeah, that's what I want to, what's your point about it, when the season all said that it don't look right.
Well, my point is basically what you just stated in regards to there's a higher probability that we're going to have undefeated teams because we've eliminated a ton of very competitive games.
Right. I was looking forward to the Ohio State Oregon one.
I'm with you. That was most likely going to be a good one. A Saturday night game at Autzen Stadium would have been a whole lot of fun.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Thank you for taking my call.
I appreciate the call, man. You have a great night.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the live chat. We'll be back live certainly on Tuesday night at 7 o'clock Eastern Time with Florida State Seminoles Live. If I've got any time tomorrow, hey, maybe I'll jump right back on here sometime on Monday right here at MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Please like the videos. And, of course, man, I got a roll call of Super Chats over the last month or so. I will acknowledge you folks at a later date. Thanks so much for joining. If you left any comments in the live chat that you would like me to respond to, please just copy and paste them and leave them at any place in any comment section, and I'll get to them. And whomever's calling right now, we're at 2 hours and 50 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it is. I'm good. Tap it out. Thanks for joining. Call next time. We'll see you.